Okay, hello and welcome to the second in a series of live webcasts that we're going to be delivering throughout this course running up to Christmas. Okay, so today's topic is methods in C#. Okay, so it's going to be, we're going to start off by writing a bit of code, and yeah, just double check, can everybody hear what I'm saying? If you can just confirm to Terry that all the students who are online, if you can just confirm via writing that you can hear, we can proceed. Okay, that's great. Okay, so we'll proceed now. As I was just saying, today we're going to be looking at methods, and basically to start off, what we're going to do is we're going to write a bit of code, and we're going to look at the process of passing a parameter from within our main method to an external method, and we're going to do some processing on that. We'll look processing on an integer, and we're going to look at the difference between passing by reference and passing by value, and the issues that each method evokes. Okay, so we'll finally finish up then with by writing a simple method that's going to add two integers together and return a value and print it to the console. So basically, by the end of this webcast, you should have a good idea of how methods work within C#. Okay, so I suppose one final thing before we dive into writing code is just to maybe to clarify why we have methods. Okay, why do we use methods in C#? Well, basically, the power of a method is that we can define a particular set of instructions, define them once, and once we have the method written, we can reuse it over and over again as is required within our program. Okay, so with that little introduction over, we'll move now to writing some code on the board, and it's going to be, the code on the board is going to be a mixture of English and code, so we won't get too hung up on the syntax. But hopefully we'll be able to convey the whole process of how passing parameters to methods and returning results from method works. Okay, so we'll start off by defining a class. We'll stick to the layout that we see in Visual Studio when we automatically generate a console application. So we're going to have our class program, and then we'll open up our parameter, okay? And the next thing that we need to do is we need to define a main method, okay? So what is a main method? Well, the main method essentially is the entry point for the execution of your program, okay? So every program will start within the main and finish within the main, okay? So it's important that we have a handle on what the main method is and the signature that we use, okay? Okay, so that's our main method there, and I'm going to open a curly bracket, and I'm going to close a curly bracket here. So this is the start of the execution. We'll start at this curly bracket and we'll end here, okay? And finally, I'll just finish up there by closing off our class curly brace for our program. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to define an integer, okay, and I'm going to give it a value, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a method, and I'm going to call the method change. And the purpose of this method is to change the value of our integer variable, okay? So we'll define the integer variable, we'll call our change method, and then we'll print out our integer variable to the console, okay? And we're going to do that with an integer variable to demonstrate passing by value, and then we'll move on to use an integer array to demonstrate how we can pass by reference in C#. So let's define our integer variable now. So we'll have an int a, and we'll put that equal to 10. Okay, so that variable has a value of 10, and what we're going to do next is we're going to call our change method. Now we haven't defined this method, okay? So if we were in C#, or Visual Studio rather, and we did this, what we would do, we'd get an error, and that's because change doesn't exist. But we're going to write our change method below our main method down here. Okay, so this change method is going to take an integer value, and I want to pass in the value that is stored in this variable a. Okay, so there we have it. That's all we need to do. Okay, so this is going to be the name of our method, And you can see here in brackets after, this is called our parameter list, okay? So we can pass a number of variables into our method, from our main method, as parameters, okay? And we can have multiple parameters if we wish. And as I said, we'll see when we do the add method a little later towards the end of the webcast how we can pass in two integers to a method, okay? So now that we've done that, when it's going to jump down into our change method. We haven't written that yet, and after we come back, I want to write down the value. I want to output the value of A, okay? So I'm just going to do the console dot write line A, okay? So that's our main method written now, okay? So this is the start of our program and this is the end. So it's going to finish with writing out the value of A. So let's just push on now and write our change method. And what does our change method do? Well, all it does, it's going to change the value that is stored in A, okay? So let's do that now, and we will do a static, and we're not going to return a value. That's another thing we need to talk about when we're talking about methods. You can return a value from a method. In this instance, for now, we're not going to be returning a value. So therefore, I'm going to use the void keyword, and we've all seen that, okay? So static void, and we're going to call this method, we've already called it change, so change. And then we define, when you're writing your method, you have to define what parameters it can take, okay? So I am going to define that now, and I'm going to say it's going to take an integer, and I'm going to call the integer A, okay? And now I'm going to open up, and I'm going to close our method change. So we're going to pass a value into A, and what are we going to do? We're going to assign a new value to our variable that we pass into our method, okay? So let's do that now. I'm going to assign the value of 5 to A. And that's it, okay? That's our change method, okay? So it takes in a value and it changes the value, whatever it is that we pass in to A. Okay, so I have one brief question now that I would like to ask the floor, okay? Can anybody tell me when we run this program, what is going to happen when we get to this line here? What will be outputted to the DOS prompt? So I'll just ask Terry now just to see, has anybody come up with any answers? Remember what we're doing, we're saying A is equal to 10, then we pass in that 10 into a change method, and the value changes to 5, and then we go back up to our main method and we print out the value of A.
Joseph said 5.
Joseph says 5, okay, anybody else? Anybody else have any answers there? We'll just leave it at that so, and I will take that as a good answer, Joseph. It's exactly what I wanted you to say. I was leading you down that path, but that is actually not what happens here, okay? And that is to do with the way I have set up this piece of code. And I just wanted to illustrate how we pass by value, and we're going to look at actually what exactly happens in memory. So by the end of this, we should understand the reason why 5 is not printed out. The actual answer that will be printed to the console is 10, okay? So the output of this program will be 10. Okay? Now, why is that? Okay, so let's just look at what's happening in memory. Now, because we're using a primitive type here, we won't be talking about the heap memory at all, okay? But we will look at that when we use the array. So, basically, we're talking about what's happening in the stack here. And this is to do with scope as well, but we're not going to delve too deeply into this topic now. I just want you to understand how we pass by a value, and if we are passing by a value, if we want to update anything within the main method, if we want to update A within the main method, and we're passing by value, then we must return the updated variable and set it equal to A, okay? But we'll update that code in 1 minute. I just want to go through the memory here. So when we define this variable A, what happens? We get an allocation in memory, and the value of 10 is stored in the stack in A. Then what happens? We call this change method, and what happens is, when we pass by value, all that happens is, this goes out of scope. So the main method is no longer available in memory, and as we call that, this value of 10 is copied into a different, so that's the essential thing, it's out of scope, so this a doesn't exist anymore, so a new variable is created on the stack here, also called a, and the value that we pass in is copied into its point in memory, okay? So 10 gets copied in there, and then we enter our method, and the value gets updated to 5, okay, in the scope of this method down here. So that 10 gets updated to 5. And then when we get to this point here, we return back to our main scope, okay? And so then we jump back up here, and this comes alive again, okay? And then we print out A to the console. So basically, because we were passing by value, only the value was copied in. There was no reference to the actual address there. So basically, this here being changed within our change method does not update the value of our initial a variable within main. Okay. So how can we need to change our change method so that it actually returns this new value. So it's going to return our value back to a. Just as we passed in our initial value of 10 to the parameter listing of our change method, we want to return the value, the new value, the updated value. We want to return that a, and we want to store it in our a variable here. And simple way to do that, again, methods, and we always have a return type. We're going to update the return type so that it can return. Now, just by doing that there, we've basically allowed our change method to return an integer, okay? Finally, to complete the process, we put in the keyword return, and we return our updated a value, okay? So now, our method is set up so that we can take in a parameter, do some processing on that parameter, and return the result back to where we called the method. So at this point here, what happens is a value gets returned back to here, okay? Now, we need to update our main method so that we can somehow store the value that is returned. So if you can think of this in your mind as when this is executed, okay, we get to this point and it's returning a. A is a value, so it's returning 5. So basically, a good way to do it is just to hide all this and say, this is not here anymore, but what is there is the value that was returned from this method. So essentially, this equates to the number 5, okay? And then in order to update our integer variables defined within main, all we need to do is to put a equal to that. So a is equal to change 5. And now, Joseph, your answer is 100%. The output will now be, because we've passed in our initial value of 10, it gets copied into this parameter, we update it to 5, and this is the important thing, we return the updated a, or the value of 5, back to here, and we assign it back to our original variable. So this is a very important point, and now the output of this program will be 5. Okay, so that's how this whole process that we did there of creating a primitive integer, passing it in as a parameter, that is known as passing by value. Why is it known as passing by value? Because the value of the variable that's stored in memory is copied into our method, or whatever the parameter is here. Just another point to note, this doesn't have to be A, we call that B, doesn't matter, and we could return B. That's irrelevant. These don't have to match up, because some students do get hung up on that, okay? So, is everybody happy with the whole process that just took place there? I'm just going to open the floor for more questions now. Is there any questions on that process that happened there? And if there isn't, we'll move on to the second part of our tutorial, whereby we won't look at passing by value, we're going to look at passing by reference. And when we pass by reference, that means we don't pass in a value, we pass a reference to an address in memory, an object. Okay? So is there any questions there, Terry? No. No questions. I'm delighted. I really hope that everyone is pretty clear on what's happening now, okay? So I'm just going to update our code, and I'll just rewrite it a small bit. So again, we're changing this now. This is no longer going to be... I'll just delete that. So we'll just rub that out. And our output again is going to be a question mark. So instead of defining a basic primitive type A now, we're going to define an integer array, okay? And we're going to put it equal to new int 1, okay? And just to, we could have initialized the array there with our value, but I'm not going to do that, just to refresh everyone how we can actually access the point in an array. So we're going to set the size of this array. It is set up so it can hold one integer, and we're just going to go back to the whole index of an array now. The index of an array starts at 0, so I want to set the first block in our array to 10. So I'm going to use an index of 0. Okay, so now our array, the first block in our array, has a value of 10. Okay, so let's just update our change method again, and I'm not going to return anything again. I'm going to revert back to what we had initially at the start of the previous example. Okay, so let's do this. Right, we're nearly there. So we're going to call our change method again. So change, and this time we're passing in not an integer, not a primitive type integer, but we're passing in an array. An array is an object. Okay, so where are we? So if we're passing in an array, what else do we need to do to our change method? We need to update the parameter list so that it can take not an integer, but an integer array. So I'll just put in my two little square brackets there after the integer, and that's not very clear, so I'll just spell that out. Hold on. Okay. Now, what we want to do is we want to update this value of our array. It's the exact same as the last time, except we're updating not an integer, but an integer array block. So we reference that again. We want to reference the first block in our array. So the index is going to be 0, and we're going to set that to 5. And finally then, we want to output array 0, and we want to see what we get on the console. So let's just do the console dot write line, and this time we're going to output array position index 0. Now, question time again. Let's go. Can anybody tell me what will be outputted to the console this time? So I'll open the question to the floor, and I'll just give Terry 1 minute to get some answers back.
Yuri says 10.
Yuri says 10. Anybody else?
No other